Does being a dad ruin your life? Does it mean endless sleepless nights, no time to yourself, no money, just being frazzled and distracted constantly? Well, we're going to find out on today's episode.
That's
We're
right.
going to be talking about fatherhood.
Yeah, society has presented an image of fathers as often buffoons and mothers having to come and fix all the problems. And so in today's episode, let's jump right in and learn, does being a dad ruin your life?
Before we get to that, we're going to talk about today's handshake, which is spending time with your kids. Fathers are so important to their children's development. In fact, they say that a son loves his mother, but he wants to be like his father. So spending time with your children is an estimable value, whether they're a boy or girl.
Yeah.
Being a father, spending time with your kids is one of the most important things you can do. And the ways to do this are almost endless.
Yeah, some of the ways, obviously, wrestling or roughhousing with your sons, going on date nights with your daughters. I know that's been pivotal in my relationship. Building things, both with sons and daughters, actually, and many other things. So being a dad is one of the most gentlemanly things that we've ever had the privilege of doing, and I think men who are not married will ever have the privilege of doing. You have to call on all the successes, all the failures, all of the books you've read, all the possibilities, and really prayerfully discern them and appropriately raising your kids. But it's worthwhile, it's rewarding, and through all the struggles and strife, it is a gentlemanly pursuit.
Yes, I mean, being a father is a blessing, okay? It is essential to my identity as a man. But I also think it's important that we acknowledge that there is a cross involved with fatherhood. Fatherhood can be incredibly difficult. It can be incredibly challenging. It can bring you face to face with your own weaknesses.
Well said.
As a man. The struggle of fatherhood is one of the things that will mature you or ruin you faster than anything else, because it brings all of those insecurities, all those weaknesses to the surface, and then you have a choice. What are you going to do with that?
That's right.
And it will either sanctify you or turn you into a very selfish person.
That's right.
And so we have a choice as fathers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Sam, you and I are both fathers. We're both blessed with that. I'm blessed with a lot of siblings that have big families. I've got brother-in-law with 7 kids. I've got another brother-in-law with 8 kids, another brother-in-law with 5. My wife is one of 7. And I have 5 kids, right?
Yeah.
Or I have 9 kids, right? 5 with me, 4 already entrusted with the infinite love and mercy of God. And those 5 kids, 8 and under, have challenged me in ways that I could never have, no book would teach you, and could never have possibly imagined the challenging. So we don't want to sugarcoat it. We don't want to pretend like being a father is a how-to A through Z, but with the right mindset on, it's really an anointed vocation.
Yeah, I mean, and there's, let's put it this way, there's nothing more joyful than family life, and there's nothing more maddening than family life sometimes, because kids just know how to push your buttons, and their joyful exuberance, they can drive you crazy sometimes, and yet some of the most happiest, joyfulest, if those are words, memories in my life are times with my family, my wife and kids, and we just have a truly blessed family, I think. I have 4 children. I should say my 5th is on the way. But we have 2 girls and 3 boys. And they really are the apple of my eye. And I just look forward to every day with them. But it is a trial. But let's talk, before we continue, let's talk a little bit about the impact of fatherhood or the impact of the lack of fatherhood in our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we see that, and anybody who pays any attention in the media or the news is aware that there is a father crisis in our society.
Yeah.
And that father crisis is increasing percentage, is 21% or a little bit higher, I can't remember the statistic, of kids in America are growing up without a father. The father is not even present, not even visiting, he is totally void and absent of their lives.
Yeah.
And we also have just an increased recognition, of the need for authentic fathers. So, fathers who are present but absent, as the saying is, that fathers who show up in the room but ignore their kids or are annoyed by their kids and never show that outward affection of love is also causing a toxic growth environment for children.
Right. So on the one hand, you have fathers who aren't even physically present.
Right.
And then on the other hand, you have fathers who are physically present, but who are maybe mentally and emotionally distant, have no interest in engaging with their kids, just plop down in front of the TV and essentially shoo their kids away. And it really is tragic. And it's gotten so bad in our culture that the federal government has had to launch a multi-million-dollar multimedia campaign, including billboards, websites, videos, blog posts, all trying to encourage men to be fathers and to embrace that role of fatherhood. Fatherhood.gov, just look it up. And it really has gotten to that point where we have to have billboards that say, take time to be a father today.
That's right. Well, in Japan, it's similar, but they are having couples getting married and never having children. Right. So they are united and living together, but never open to the thought of procreating, of having children, right? Being fruitful and multiplying is non-existent. So they're actually giving these robotic babies to couples to try and get them to experience an emotional reaction or desire to have kids because for so long the thought of having kids was a burden and is a detriment to your career goals and your success in life, and you don't have control over that aspect, and when kids come along it's something not worth your time, and therefore avoid it at all cost.
Right. And it's incredible how much things have changed, because if you look at traditional cultures, kind of pre-modern, pre-industrial revolution cultures, being a father was one of the greatest prides, or where the pride of your life was being a father.
That's right.
You look at the ancient Roman culture, and being the pater familias was like a big deal. But also, if you look at like Norse culture, what was always... you would always introduce yourself as, Lars, son of Thor, or whatever, and there was always this reference back to your father, and that gave you almost an identity as a man. I'm son of so-and-so. That's where you see the last names in Nordic culture, Bjornsson or whatever, because it was so central to your identity to be a son and to be a father. That's right. That it was just kind of interwoven into their whole cultural identity. But that was the way all traditional cultures were. There was no greater pride for a man to, 20, 30 years after becoming an adult, to look back and see, a brood of children and their children, and to just look at this abundance of life. And that was something that men took pride in.
That's right.
And marriage, they understood going into marriage. Marriage is ordered towards children. Like, that's just what you do when you get married. You have children. But now we live in this culture where it's like children are a drain, children are a nuisance. I'm just going to get a dog, and we've kind of substituted this love and fullness of life for kind of this sterile and cold lack of openness.
I agree.
To life.
The me culture can't contain children. And but it is a joy of children. And your comment just reminded me of this picture that we have up here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids. And
Wow.
so, and was a common thing. And again, something desired, And so as Catholic gentlemen, we understand that being a father is a vocation.
Yeah.
So it's not simply to be a father or not to be a father. It's not simply just a choice that can be made willy-nilly, but it is a vocation in life that can call us and does call us to holiness.
That's right. Yeah, and when we look at the word vocation, means calling. Yeah, it's a vocare, to call.
That's right.
And God is calling us to participate in His a temporal reflection of His own divine fatherhood, as our Archbishop Sheen reminds us.
Yeah.
I don't have the exact quote, but he says that the human fatherhood is a reflection of God's fatherhood. And what a beautiful gift to be able to mirror that on a temporal level.
Yeah.
And it's just as serious as a vocation as being called to the priesthood or being called to religious life. It's that serious. And I love what Father Lovasic says, that fatherhood is a vocation for a serious vocation for serious men. Like, it's not something trivial. It's not something tacked on to your life in addition to your job or your career, which is your real vocation. No, like, your job and your career are oriented towards providing for your family.
That's right.
And your family is your primary vocation.
That's right. And I love what you're saying. And you triggered in my mind St. Alphonsus. And St. Alphonsus wrote a letter to fathers and to mothers. And in that letter, he talked about how when we go before the throne of God, that's what will be judged, is how seriously and how intentionally and how well did we parent our children. So not if you were a C-level executive, not if you were a high-ranking official in the government or in another organization, not if you spearheaded a nonprofit that was incredibly successful, but how well did you parent your children?
Right.
And so I think about it being a calling, about it being a calling from God, that means we often have to be stripped from ourselves, right? Or our notion of things. And I know that when I decided decided or had a preference and God directed me to become a husband and to have children, I thought it was going to be a lot of fun and games. And I did. I really was looking forward to when the child was walking and when we were just able to go have fun together. And, and sure, I will parent them and I will make sure that I'm helping them grow and directing them to something greater. But wouldn't it be great to have just a constant adventurer in life, somebody to build with, somebody to go on bike rides and to go fishing and to go hunting with. And while all of those things are a great aspect of being a father, there's also the crying for 2 hours straight in the car seat or late at night, and that desperate ripping from your own desires and your selfishness. And honestly, in many of those situations, it's hard to love. It's hard to choose that love. And praise God for our mothers in our lives, the wives in our lives, to turn to in those situations.
Yeah, and marriage involves a cross. Fatherhood involves a cross. And I'm, just being perfectly honest, there's something in every man that wants to flee from that cross. And a lot of men lose themselves in work or, other pursuits, hobbies, and ignore their family because they're scared. They're scared. Because marriage is incredibly humbling. Fatherhood is one of the most humbling things you'll ever do. There's times when I look at the bills coming in and the money coming in
Yeah.
and just feel that stress growing. And then I realize that my children also are struggling academically. And then I realize that there's disciplinary issues or, disobedience going on or child's developing a bad habit. Oh, and also the children have interests. How can I develop and nurture those interests? And, so there's the educational needs, the emotional needs, the physical needs, all of these things kind of weighing on your shoulders. And it can be absolutely overwhelming.
Sure can.
It's absolutely overwhelming sometimes. And you realize the weight that comes with fatherhood.
Yeah.
And so again, there's a cross there that's involved, and we need to not be cowards and run from that, but rather embrace that with joy in imitation of our Lord. Because, each of us, every vocation does have a cross.
That's right.
Priests have their cross. Religious have their cross. We have ours. But marriage is difficult. And the sooner we admit that, the better. Because the world says marriage is the best way to fulfill all your felt needs.
That's right. All those
it's the best way
points of
to be happy.
gratification. That's right.
But no, that's not the way the church sees it. That's not the way God designed it.
No.
It's for our sanctification.
That's right, because marriage is a sacrament.
That's right.
And so there's hope because marriage is a sacrament that we can turn to and we can rely on. And we'll talk about that later on in the episode. But it is a sacrament, and as a fundamental pillar of this sacrament is the procreation, education, and upbringing of those children. Right. And so we have a responsibility, we have a duty, and we have an obligation in that sacrament. But could you imagine going through life going through fatherhood even, and not understanding what we're talking about?
Right.
I mean, so like you said, men want to flee, right? Because there's a joke, right, that there's that child that will be your saint maker, right?
Yeah, right.
It's that child that's going to truly rip you from yourself, and they are bathing holiness upon you.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that understanding or that humor, and the emotional honeymoon phase and feelings has started to wear off, and the burden and stress of taking care of a family, and you don't have that sacramental grace and that backing, I mean, who wouldn't run? I mean, that's exactly it. So praise God for that being, that we are Catholic and that we have the truth and the fullness and the understanding of the sacrament of marriage. But also there's a right order to fatherhood.
Yeah. And
it's important to understand what that right order to fatherhood is.
Yeah. So when we were talking about that, and I think I know what you're talking about, is the idea that, fathers are there to give guidance and structure to the family. If you think about the family structure, it's almost like the father's the head and the mother's the heart, and the father kind of represents law and order in a sense. Not that fathers can't be loving and caring. Absolutely, we must be. Yeah. But also there's that sense in which we have to sometimes discipline, and we sometimes have to challenge, and that's not always fun. No. But my boys, let's face it, they're just kind of rowdy. They're kind of lazy. Yeah. They don't want to work. But they just want to play, and they want to goof off, crash around the house, which is fine. That's what boys do. But also, they need to be challenged sometimes. And that's not up to mom to challenge them. She gets frustrated when maybe I'm traveling or I'm busy and I'm not around, because she's got to try to corral these wild boys, which are kind of like huskies, That's right. They're like a sled dog team. Channeled, they can be incredibly strong. But they can also be incredibly wild. Yeah, and it's like they need that guidance and that firm hand sometimes. And that's not necessarily my personality, but it's my call as a father to do that and provide that. And likewise, girls need something different. Yeah. They don't necessarily need that firm hand, but they sometimes need that attention, that care. than a father can give, and they need moral guidance. And
I agree.
and we've all known cases when that hasn't been there, and how tragic the results can be. So, fathers have got to provide that structure, that order, that moral formation, and that discipline that a mother can't always give, despite her best efforts.
That's right. And and there's something about that, and I want to talk about the discipline there too, because I don't know if it's the same in your marriage, but I know when my wife threatens or my wife gives the warning, I guess a better way of saying it, it doesn't stick the same way that when I do. Right? And there's a reason, right? And so my kids, when my wife has to call me up when I'm at work because a kid has disobeyed, she basically has to discipline them to get on the phone to talk to me because there's this order, of disciplinary. And then the other thing is that while my wife has to discipline, I don't want my wife to have to be the disciplinarian. I don't want to be the father who is absent and who makes my wife, rear the children, including disciplining them when those situations need.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. There's a reason God gave us the dad voice.
Yeah.
The dad voice.
That's right.
Boys,
exactly.
get over here.
That's right.
Sometimes you gotta have that firmness, and women, your wife will look to you for that.
That's right.
And she'll get frustrated and bitter if she has to do that, carry that burden, because let's face it, moms have got enough on their shoulders without having to be that disciplinarian.
That's so true.
They've got so much on their plate, and so that's our responsibility as dads, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way God designed it.
That's right.
That's the way God designed it. So, and your kids, they'll actually a lot of times children's naughty behavior. They're just testing the limits.
That's right.
And if they don't encounter any limits,
each of them,
they're disoriented. They don't know what to do. They don't like it when there's no structure, when there's no boundaries, when there's no order in the home. Children need to know that I can go this far and no further. And if they don't have that, it can be disheartening for a child, confusing. So even though you may think that your children don't want any rules, they actually do, and they actually thrive more when there is that basic structure and boundaries in the home and limits. Children need freedom within limits.
That's right. And I like that comment on structure in the home, because it really does come from the father. The ability to structure the day, structure that which is important. So I think of examples of praying the rosary as a family after dinner. There is often times that my wife attempts to do it with the kids, and it is just a nightmare because I'm on travel, I'm gone. And I just hear it in her voice, and sometimes she'll call in the middle of the rosary and I'll hear it in there. And while every time I pray the rosary with the family, it's not perfect, we do it every day, but the point is that is a structure that our children need. And that structure from the fact that we are going to eat together as a family, and that we're going to pray the rosary together before bed or right after dinner, is an order and a routine that you mutually discuss with your wife and you set, but the father really needs to implement it, right? Really needs to be that guiding head of his family. And just so that there's no confusion, I am nothing without God, but nothing without my wife, and I'm in desperate need of the complementarity of what it is that our union and our marriage brings to the family. But this is an opportunity in an area where you can really be the leader, and that your children need, that fathers need. I'm sorry, that children need from their fathers.
That's right. Yeah. And two, like, I think a lot of times men are content to just delegate some of that spiritual formation to their wives. Just say, well, you come up with the the devotional practices in the home. You are the one that always has to harass me to, pray the rosary or go to Mass or whatever, those things. Wouldn't it be wonderful if a dad initiated something like that?
Yeah.
Like, the dad says, we're going to go to adoration. Take your son to adoration. Take your daughter to adoration. Wouldn't that be a wonderful way to spend time with God and spend time with your children?
Yeah.
Just do it. Or suggest a family rosary. If you're not doing it now, wouldn't it be wonderful if you suggested that? Your wife would probably be blown away.
Yeah.
She'd probably be so happy to have a dad finally taking the lead in the home, spiritually speaking. And so as husbands, again, it's another aspect of fatherhood that we kind of sometimes want to flee. It's a little uncomfortable talking about these things. So I'm just going to let my wife do it. There was a time when I was actually quite nervous to suggest those things in the home. I didn't want to be the bad guy. I didn't want to make the kids groan and roll their eyes that, it's time for family rosary or something like that. So for a long time, I actually resisted that aspect of my calling as a father. But then finally, one day I realized, you know what? This is what God has called me to do. I'm just going to do it. So I suggested it, and the kids were a little bit annoyed at first. But then they got used to it, and they liked it, and they were reminding me when I forgot. So it all started, with that decision, though, to step out of my comfort zone and to be a leader in the home. And the results, have been wonderful. So I just think that we've got to get over ourselves.
That's right.
And just step up and do what we need to do as fathers.
Yeah, praise God. And I completely agree. And you brought up that point of praying the rosary in suggesting that, but you and I are both very keen on balance. We're both very aware of, not setting an ideal of perfection that we require of ourselves. So if a listener hasn't practiced the family rosary and the wife might be adverse to the notion, try a family decade of the rosary. Have one intention. That's something that helps in our family rosary, is that each of the kids get to pray an intention for the rosary, right? And it's really adorable and really cute. And then we do the litany of the saints, and they all want to come, throw out a saint. And my son David is all into Padre Pio right now, and so he'll say Padre Pio 3 or 4 times during the litany. And so, but start if necessary, small, but suggest. Be that leader, be that director.
Ease into things, all things with charity and patience. Don't say, we're going to pay a 15-decade rosary every day. Your wife will resent you for that.
That's right.
But and if something comes up and your wife, the kids are tired, or you were out late.
That's right.
It's okay, but
that's right.
But strive for that. Be, set the bar high.
Yeah, I agree. And so another thing about this moral formation or spiritual formation is actively being involved when you take your kids to church on Sunday, right? So that is one of the every book that's out there within the Catholic or the No Man Behind and the Protestant world. When you look at these masculine books, even in the secular world, there's this notion that men are uninterested and vapid and are unaware, and when they go to church, they're strictly out of obligation. And again, that goes back to that being present but being absent.
Yeah.
If your wife is carrying you to church and requiring that you go to church, it's time to really spend in prayer and thinking about these things, right? It's time for you to really discern what you can do to be that spiritual head or to be that guide or to support your wife, in that which is true and that which is good. And I mentioned briefly, the secular world, that all goes back to that study, and it's a very famous study, and I know a lot of individuals have heard it, but it was in 1994, there was this Swiss study that came out just about how the effects of mothers and or fathers or both going to church affected the future generation, their children, in going to church later in life. And the study went through, it was multi-years, right? It came out in 94, but it was many, many years and hundreds and if not thousands of families, both Catholic and Protestant in that sphere. But some of the key takeaways, or at least one of the key takeaways is when a mother was going regularly, but the father was going irregularly, so sometimes he was missing, sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't. I'm assuming when he was there, he wasn't actively engaged. Only 3% of children carried on and continued to go to church regularly. Wow. But when the flip of that happened, when fathers went to church regularly and mothers were the ones that were going irregularly, the amount of kids was 38%.
Wow.
So that complementarity is so important, and I'm not diminishing that, but when you look at just a simple secular study that showcases mother is regular, father irregular, 3%, father is regular, mother is irregular, 38%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just incredible, but as Catholics, we understand that it's ordained.
Yes, absolutely.
That's what it is. So.
And the other point I want to make about that is fathers have to take their own spiritual life seriously.
Amen.
Because you can't give what you don't have. Amen. And if your spiritual tank, your emotional tank is empty, you're not going to be able to give anything to your family. So the question is, are you praying? Are you seeking to grow in holiness? Are you seeking to be a man of God? Because if you're not, there's no way you're going to be able to lead your children, your family. It's just, everything's going to suffer.
That's right.
And you say, well, that's too much. It's too much. It's too busy. I'm too busy. I don't have time for that. Like, when am I going to learn to? That's why we're talking about fatherhood as a cross, because it is difficult. It is difficult to find the time to meditate, to pray, to do the things that we need to do to develop our own spiritual life, and to ensure the growth of our own children. It's going to stretch you.
Yeah,
There's a sense in which you'll always be inadequate, and that's humbling.
That's so true.
But at the same time, we're called to give the best that we can, whatever that might be, but give the very best of ourselves, striving after this. Fail, fine, God will take care of the rest, but He wants to know that you did your best.
Yeah, absolutely. And, working on yourself, you cannot give what you do not have or possess. That's so true. The same of it is just that being self-reflective, that importance of being reflective on your reactions, on your actions. Are you being, proactive? Are you being reactive? Because I'll be honest, I'll hear my children yell at each other, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that is me. They are.
Yes, they say the same things you do.
That's right. They are emulating. I need to be more cautious of that. And so I appreciate you bringing that up. That's so important for all of us to remember and all of us to be thinking of. So we've kind of been alluding to a bunch of these different things, but I think another important thing for us to go through is, how can we be better fathers? I know we've been alluding to it and we've been talking about things and what is fatherhood, but what are more ways that we can proactively grow in our vocation, grow in, let's say, good performance of our vocation, and be better dads to our kids?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is time. Okay, like everything starts with the time that you spend with your kids. Your presence is the best gift that you can give your family. And again, as we said earlier in the episode, that presence isn't just physically, it's emotionally and in your actual attention to your children, which again, after a long day at work can be tiring. Like you may just want to collapse and just kind of indulge in relaxation.
Absolutely.
Which is understandable. But they need you. They need you. The other thing too, I think is very important, is protecting your children. There are a lot of temptations and dangers in our world today. I work for a company where, unfortunately, I learn about things like children being exposed to like pornography and other soul-destroying dangers at 6 years old. and sometimes getting addicted for years without ever having talked to their parents about it, without their parents ever knowing. But their parents got them an iPhone or an iPad for Christmas, thinking it was perfectly harmless. But they didn't take that intentional step of protecting their children with a filter or with parental controls or with time limits or with guidance on how to use this. It's like handing your child a loaded gun, you know. But there's also other temptations out there. You know, peer pressure, for example.
Of course.
Pop culture is filled with messages that are contrary to our faith. So as a father, you're responsible for your children's moral and physical and emotional well-being. And if you're neglecting that, if you don't take that role seriously, your children will suffer in one form or another.
That's right.
And that's your responsibility.
I agree. And I know we will have another episode just on this
on this
role,
topic, yes.
And I'm looking forward to that. But you brought up time, and actually it was Steve Wood's book, Christian Fatherhood on Raising Godly Children. I believe that's the title. It's been now 10 years or so since I read it, but I remember very distinctly him saying that children spell love Time.
Yes.
And I like to just, I agree with that completely. I also say that the time that your boys want to spend with you is often very different than the time your girls want to spend with you. And it's important to recognize that difference and be okay with it, because I can tell you what, my daughters are not wanting to play with roughhousing and knives, and not that my sons play with knives, but the fun things of I'd say masculine life, but very frequently they want to talk. They want to show me their drawings. They want to talk to me about their day. And their little femininity just comes out in those moments. And I find, for me personally, with my daughters that are 8 and 6 right now, that I do find a joy in it. I think I was blessed to have heard Philip Mango talk about fatherhood and how women think and how women relate, and on the psychological level. And one of the things is just talking in what we would say talking in circles, but it's how they reason. And I can see that beauty coming out of my daughters. And for me, because I'm aware of that, I don't get annoyed that they're going on for 4 minutes and kind of saying the same thing and where are we going in this, because that's their femininity, and that's beautiful. And so I think that spending time 100%, even if, and very often is the case, it pulls us from ourselves because we're working hard, we are tired, we have chores to do around the house, we have places that we have to go and purchase things for groceries or what have you, or going to Home Depot, which can be fun. But spending time with your kids, or bringing your kids along for those things, actually, just thinking about it. And, take a couple of your kids to the Home Depot or to the grocery store, these places, they find great joy. But sitting them down in front of a TV and ignoring them so that you can do a bunch of other stuff is something that you got to really caution. And you got to really think about.
A perfect example of that, though, is the other day I was done after a long day at work, and I was tired. And I sat down in my chair, and my boys came running over, and they said, Dad, can we have a wrestling match? That's their favorite dad time now, is wrestling match, which, by the way, when they were little, it was no problem. I'd just throw them around like ragdoll. Sure. But now, they hit like a truck. Like, oh my goodness, these boys, if they get any bigger, I'm going to be in the emergency room. But
you're going to need some jujitsu to combat that.
My one son especially, he's just like a born wrestler, and he'll just run at you and just slam in you, and like, oh my goodness. The next day, my ribs were bruised.
My goodness.
But it was like they just loved it. They just loved it. We wrestled for like 45 minutes, and I was exhausted, but it was wonderful dad and son time. And the girls, of course, they just want to sit in my lap and like you said, jabber away, and that's wonderful time too. So
give them what they need.
But
Absolutely.
They need that. They desperately need that.
That's right. And and so then some of the other things that we can do, obviously, that we brought up is discipline, right? So a good father disciplines, but he disciplines rightly. He disciplines justly.
Yeah.
And that takes many conversations with your wife. It takes many nights of prayer. It takes many reflections on previous disciplines, because my wife and I are real big on understanding the love language of each of our kids and not using that against them. Because I know there is a notion that one size discipline fits all, right? I've got one tool in my shed, and that's the one I'm going to use. It's going to be a spanking, regardless of whether they spilled their milk or whether they, ran out into the middle of the street or, stayed out too late at night. I go against that, and I want to constantly, and we do, have many conversations, because that's my natural go-to, right? Is if I've got one tool that works, then how much easier is life when that's my one go-to? But is that the better approach for our kids? And my daughters, just to look at them with severity and with intensity causes them to crumble. But I'll never forget my son. The first time, David, he's 4 now, but the first time I swatted him, he looked at me and he slapped me in the face. He swung back. And I was just so shocked in my immaturity and my newness as a father, because I had only had 2 girls prior to that. And I just look at them, seriously, and they crumble, they cry, they run to the corner, or whatever the case might be. But not my son. I knew it right then and there. I was like, oh my goodness, this is a totally different beast.
That sounds so familiar. Yes. Yeah. I mean, and like you said, disciplining in a way that is appropriate to the situation, that is actually for their own good.
That's right.
And the other thing too is never conflate discipline with lack of love. Like, children need to know that even when they're in trouble, that you still love them.
That's right.
In fact, one of my kids the other day came and said to me, even when I'm naughty, I still love you. And even when you're mad at me, you still love me, right? And I said, that's right.
That's good.
And they desperately need to know that. And if you ever give your kids the impression that I'm punishing you not for your own good, but just because I'm angry at you, be incredibly destructive.
Just as good. You reminded me of a priest that counseled me. He reminded me, so I had 5, but 4 at the time, and they were all under the age of reason.
Yeah.
And while they still need to be disciplined and they still need to be guided and stuff like that, controlling my own frustration and my own anger, he reminded me that, he said, John, you have to remember that they are angering you not because they are offending God, but because they are offending you.
That's so true.
I was like, wow. That's so true. So it's important to keep ourselves in check.
Yes.
I think it's also really important, 2 things, that if you are somebody who's prone to anger and prone to rage, to put checks and balances in place for yourself before you discipline. Not that kids discipline, and we both know when the younger the kid, the more immediate the discipline needs to be, because if you wait an hour, they're not going to remember what they did. And so, or they're not going to have experienced that moment the same. And so it's important, but if you are somebody who is, really, impulse and rage is something that is a cross of yours, we encourage you to put in checks and balances, right? Count 1, 2, 3, turn in a circle, jump 10 times up and down. I don't know, do something to control yourself.
Yeah, and there's really 2 ways punishment can be selfish. One is, like you said, where you feel offended and you're going to let them have it.
That's right.
The other one, though, a lot of times is parents refuse to punish because they don't want to be the bad guy.
So important.
A little Bobby, I'm just going to let him run amok, because kids I just don't want to be mean. Yeah. Well, no, then you're failing in your role as a father as well. So severe punishment done in anger can be harmful, and it can be more about you than about them.
That's right.
But likewise, failing to punish because you want to be liked by your child more than you want to be a father that you should be.
That's right.
That also can be damaging to your child because, again, they need those limits, they need those boundaries. They need to know that there's consequences for healthy moral development.
That's right, absolutely. And you brought up love already and kids needing to know love. And I just want to come back to that and talk about after discipline has happened, the importance as a father to show them that you forgive them and to show them that they are loved and that we work towards being like God the Father, slow to anger, quick in kindness. This is that opportunity right there for you to be quick in kindness, is to, when you've had to discipline and justly and rightly, like we were talking about, then you also let them know that, hey, if they need to hug to reconnect, if they need to hear Dad say, I love you and I forgive you, then it is an obligation too of yours to give them that, because that's all part of their formation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, moving on a little bit from the discipline piece, which is just been a really good conversation. Another way that we can really be there for our kids is prayer. Praying with them, praying for them, making sure that they know that you're praying for them. I heard someone say one time that a lot of times when we're frustrated with our kids and their character or different aspects of their behavior, we'll often lecture them. Oh, you got to do this, and here's why, and oftentimes that's limited effectiveness. But I heard someone say once that tell everything that you would say to your child to God about your child. Express those frustrations, express those griefs, those complaints to God, and ask Him to work on the heart of your child, because ultimately it's their heart that needs to change, not just their externals. There's kids that sometimes will comply externally just to appease you, but inwardly they're rebellious and hard, and they've rejected you, and they've turned away from you inwardly. And to me, one of the most important things with my children is trust. I want them to know that, I want them to trust that I always have their good at heart behind everything that I do. And I don't ever want to violate that through harshness and through just constant haranguing. And so, just to pray for your child and pour out your heart to God on behalf of your children. I love that. There's things that we won't be able to fix as parents. Despite our best efforts at discipline, despite our best efforts at guidance, there's some things that we just can't do, but only God can do.
That's right.
So just everything you would say to your child, tell it to God.
Yeah, and I'd say authentic gentlemen are comfortable with that humility. They're comfortable with that understanding that they are not going to be able to get all these answers right, and they are not going to be able to know what to do in every situation. I really love that. I'm going to use that, Sam. I really appreciate that. I'm going to reflect more on that, because he wants to hear this from us as well, right? We know our God the Father is a loving Father, slow to anger and quick in kindness, and that's a great way. But we're talking about God, and I think that this is also another important point to talk about, and is the spiritual formation and spiritual direction. So we've already talked about one way. We talked about the rosary. We talked about just a decade if a full rosary is not possible. We talked about, we talked about going to Mass and being actively involved in Mass. But catechesis or moral formation, often happens outside of just those one-off situations, such as going to Mass on Sundays or praying the rosary every day. Which, by the way, I will say, when you get into the habit of praying the rosary every day, your kids behave better at Mass because they're more used to that time in silence. But there's some other things that we should be doing for catechesis. So do you do anything as far as reading scripture to your kids or reading from the catechism to the kids or Baltimore or any of that stuff? I know that I fail at that in many times, but I use the opportunities when a situation's there, or I'll have those aha moments, but I know I personally could use every Saturday I do this, or every Sunday I do that. So any ideas about that?
So we do several things. Now,
Yeah.
I will say that we have a kind of a specific philosophy on the more intellectual formation.
Yeah.
So we're not drilling our children per se on the Baltimore Catechism or anything like that quite yet.
Yeah.
But we are teaching them moral virtues that I think are very important. For example, gratitude.
Yeah.
I think it's incredibly important for children to be grateful.
Amen.
In fact, I think gratitude is the foundation of a healthy spiritual life.
Yeah.
So one thing we do is, I wouldn't say every night, but almost every night, we go around the table and each child lists 3 things that
Yes.
they're grateful for from that day. And it's amazing the stuff these kids,
Yes.
my daughter is like, she just turned 3, and yet she always has some of the most profound things that she's grateful for. She's like, I'm thankful for light.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for rain. You know, and like I'm like, what? You're
She's
3,
Franciscan.
you know,
Yeah.
and she's but she means it.
Yeah, of course.
And so they've all learned to pay attention to the things that they're grateful for. The other thing too is just live and breathe Catholicism yourself.
Amen.
For example, invoke the saints.
Amen.
I'm often forgetful and I lose things frequently. So Saint Anthony's my friend. He's found all kinds of things for me. So my daughter picked up on this,
Yeah.
and she loses her favorite doll or something, and
Yeah.
she says, Saint Anthony, help me find my doll. And then she finds it, and she'll say, Saint Anthony's a good finder.
Yeah, praise God.
And so
I love it.
she just picked up on that. I didn't intellectually teach her that,
Yeah.
but she just absorbed that through my example. My sons too, I cross myself whenever I pass a Catholic church as a way of acknowledging Jesus' presence.
That's right.
I never told my kids what I was doing. But one day we were driving by a Catholic church and I crossed myself and my son said, you're doing that because Jesus is in there, aren't you? And I said, that's right. So they just absorb everything, and kids are little sponges.
They are.
So what you do, what you practice, they'll pick up.
I love it.
But it's those things like teaching them gratitude, teaching them that Jesus loves them, that we want to see him, want to go to Mass. Like they hate it when we miss Mass now.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so that's so great. And you actually brought up a good thing. Anytime we hear ambulance go off or we hear sirens, we immediately pray a Hail Mary and we ask Our Lady to send angels to be with them. And I think those little practices just make a world of difference. So just to kind of finish this off, I think it's important to talk about something that might not quickly resonate in the mind of a man as a father, but it's the importance of prioritizing your relationship with your wife.
Yeah.
And so I would be sad if we did not discuss that in brief, because prioritizing date nights, prioritizing your wife's health.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a date night. It doesn't have to be about you and her. I mean, that's great, but prioritizing her own health and what you do as a family and what choices you make as a husband and as a father resonate for generations.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Yeah, in fact, I heard someone say once that the most important thing you can do for your children is to love their mother. And I think it's so true because that provides an incredible foundation of security and safety for a child.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been maybe 1 or 2 times where I've exchanged a sharp word with my wife in front of my kids, and they hate that.
Yeah.
Like, they don't like that.
No.
And they need to know that we love each other. And so I make a point of, kissing my wife in front of my kids, giving her a hug, saying I love you.
Yeah.
Because I do.
Yeah.
And the more that I do that, though, the more they just feel that warmth, that love. It just fills the home with such peace and joy. And the kids, they just blossom when they know that mom and dad love each other. We love each other as siblings, and it really just kind of makes the home like a little paradise.
It does, and it's the same with me. I had a blessed moment. My 6-year-old Gianna asked recently, "Do mommy and daddies fight?" And I said, "Well, yes, they have arguments and disagreements." I said, "But your mother and father don't fight a lot." And Gemma, my 8-year-old, said, "Yeah, they don't." And I was like, praise God. But how important is that to be setting that example on a regular basis? And what a great way to bookend this episode in the sense of us talking about the problem of fatherlessness and what it's doing when fathers are gone and mothers are raising their kids by themselves.
That's right.
But then talking about that, it's more than just you being a present father to your kids and acting and directing and guiding and praying for your kids, but it's also doing all of those things in union with your wife and showing that respect and that guidance and that love by how you treat your wife and how you prioritize that relationship with your wife.
All right, so for our nightcap today, we have a theme that we've been talking about today from the very first moment, but spending time with your kids. So what are some of the favorite things you do with your kids?
Yeah, so a lot of favorite things, but right off the bat, the most favorite thing that I get to do with my kids is cause them to smile. And I remember the joy I felt with my firstborn and how when she smiled, my world just was a better place. And so I made it somewhat humorous, but somewhat a personal joy to get her to smile multiple times a day, and to do so with a lot of joy and gratefulness in my heart, and then that carried through with all my kids. And so even my little Joseph right now, who is, I guess, 10 months, just a little bit past 10 months, he smiles a lot, and it actually gives me sadness when I can't get him to smile, But sometimes, he's just in a mood, and that being said, but that for me is probably the thing that I love doing most, and in part that brings a lot of joy to me as a father. So what about you, Sam?
Yeah, so for me, it's one of my favorite things is just reading to my kids, reading aloud. The girls love to read little bedtime stories, books, but we'll read, 2 or 3, 4 of them sometimes, because as soon as I finish one, they're like, another one, Daddy, another one. Of course. And how can I say no? They're so adorable.
That's right.
And then my boys, we just finished we've been reading aloud for a couple years now. We've read a bunch of books, chapter-length books. We just finished the whole Narnia series.
Oh, wow.
And that was fantastic. They loved that. Now we're on to reading The Hobbit, which I dare say they like more than Narnia. They're running around the house pretending to be dragons and dwarves and stuff. It's great. But we'll read for an hour sometimes or more every night. Get the fireplace going and just read, and they love it. They absolutely love it. So, and I love it. It's a great joy to me. So that's one of the things I enjoy most.
I love it. So thank you so much for watching. If you are following us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, click the like button. If you're on your podcast player of choice, we're on them all. And we just pray in thanksgiving for your time. And as we always end, remember, be a man, be a saint. Thanks for watching.